Right, good morning everybody. It's a lovely, chilly, early spring morning, and my task for today is to basically get Max recommissioned and ready so that I can start driving him for the summer season. And you wouldn't really think it today, but actually the weather has been warming up and I'm keen to get out and start enjoying him again for the summer. So I'm going to do a full service today. I'm going to do oil filter, air filter, fuel filter, and I'm also going to do a couple of other jobs as well. I'm going to change the diff oil. I'll talk about that in a bit. And I'm also going to change the fluid in the clutch system because it's gone black. And again, I'll go into a bit more detail there. So that's the task for today. Let's crack on. Right, so oil and oil filter is done, and I have also topped up the transmission oil as well. So I think all of the oily jobs are basically done apart from the diff, which I'll come to in a bit. Next job is to do the air filter, so let's crack on with that. So the last time I did this job, I put in a K&N air filter, and that was actually a second one that I bought. So I've actually got two. And my idea was basically to keep them on rotation. So when I put one in the car, I can refurbish the other one and then basically swap them over at the next service because they are reusable. In fact, K&N claim that you can use them for up to 1 million miles, which is quite a claim. And if that is true, then that's certainly going to be longer than I think the car is going to survive. So what I've done is I have refurbished the other one. Which is quite easy to do. Basically, you clean it with a special cleaning liquid, and then you wash it under the tap, and then you spray on some new oil, which then soaks into the paper leaves, and then that then refurbishes the filter. And you can then reuse that as though it was new. Right, this is actually pretty clean still, to be quite honest, but never mind, I'm going to change it anyway. My new refurbished one, it's great. Put that in there. Okay. So my next job is to change the oil in the diff, and that wasn't changed very long ago, actually, about 5,000 miles back. So you might justifiably be asking, well, why am I changing it again when I changed it so soon in the past? Well, the reason is I actually made a bit of a mistake, because what I did was I changed the oil in the gearbox and the diff at the same time, and I used this MT90 from Redline, which is a 75W90 gear oil. But I did not realize that MT90 is actually specifically just designed for transmissions. It's not designed for differentials. In fact, the MT stands for manual transmission. But I didn't realize that. I thought that given that it was a 7590, which is the same as the diff uses, I could just use this in both. But in actual fact, they do a separate product, which is just a 75W90, because this MT90 has specific additives in it, which are designed to help with the synchros in manual transmissions. But those additives are not great in a diff because they add extra drag and could potentially result in extra wear in the diff. I don't think it will have done much damage because I haven't had it in there for very long, but I'm going to just do the right thing and drain it out and put in this proper 75W90 oil. So when you're draining oil out of a transmission or a diff, what you want to do is you want to loosen up the filler plug first and then the drain plug, because if you have any trouble with the filler plug, then at least you haven't lost all the oil. Okay, and now the drain plug, they're actually different sizes. The top one is a 23 and the bottom one is a 24, which is a very odd decision. There we go. Delicious. Alright, so I've got all the old oil out, and I used a hand pump just to pump out the last of the dregs that were in the base, because the back of the car is slightly jacked up at the moment, but it's quite difficult to jack up the front of the car because it's quite low to the ground and I can't get the jack underneath it. So I think this is good enough. I think pretty much all of the oil is out. So now I'm going to replace this bottom drain plug, and then we can proceed with refilling with the new oil. That's good. So I have this pump which I normally use for this sort of job, and what I'm going to do is just hook this into the top there. Must be difficult. There we go. Right, and then what I'm going to do, this pump does have a bottle, but actually what I'm going to do instead is just put it straight into the can here. And now we just pump until fluid comes out. So this is the proper 75W90 gear oil, not the transmission stuff that I previously had in here. Must be getting close now. I can start to, yeah, here we go, here it is. Starting to drip. And then we'll just pop that out. And there we go. Right, so the next thing I'm going to tackle is the fuel filter, which is under this cover back here. But actually, while I've got the wheels off, I'm just taking an opportunity just to brush off some of the dirt and just take a look at how things are here. I must say the underseal that got put on this car, it's about 6 or 7 years ago now, is actually still holding up really, really well. I'm not seeing any signs of degradation really. Not seeing any bubbling or rust underneath it. It all looks good. I mean, it would need to be pulled off at some point and redone in the next few years, I think, but for now I think it's still looking pretty decent, and it's certainly saved the car from fate of rust at this point. There is a very slight bit of corrosion beginning to start here on the inside of this wheel arch here, especially down at the bottom, so I'm going to have to sand that back and seal that off again, probably sometime this summer I think. But everything is super solid here. These sills are like new still, so very impressed with how the car's holding up so far. But I haven't done much winter driving. I have done a bit, a few trips, but generally speaking during winter I've left the car in the nice dry garage, so I think that is really the biggest factor. Where you really need to clean is up around the back of these arches here, because as you can see a lot of dirt and dust and stuff accumulates behind here, and this is what starts rotting out the arches from the back, because it's got all sorts of salt and crap in it from it's been kicked up from the road, and if it stays here too long it just forms a corrosive mess which just gradually starts eating away at the back of the bodywork. This side's actually looking a bit better. There's not much rust here. There's a tiny little bit starting down here. It's kind of getting under the underseal here, so I need to peel that back and just deal with that. That's a job for another day. Right, new filters on. That was just as much of a pig of a job as I remember it being last time. It's not so much that it's difficult, but the minute you start unplugging the hoses, then fuel just starts leaking out everywhere. And in my particular case, this Dintrol underseal is obviously oil based, and when it comes into contact with petrol, it basically just turns into this disgusting, sticky, goopy crap which just gets on all your tools and on your hands. And yeah, you basically just got this like slippery mess that you're trying to deal with while you're trying to put the new hoses in place and tighten them up. And yeah, just not a fun job at all. So those of you that have been around the channel for a while will know that this is not the first time that I've changed the fuel filter. In fact, I did it fairly recently, as in within the last 5 years, which is not very long for a fuel filter. So you might again be wondering, why am I changing the fuel filter again so soon after I did it the last time? And the reason is because just after I changed the fuel filter last time was when I had that disastrous episode where I put diesel into my fuel tank. But there is a certain school of thought which is that when you put diesel into a fuel system that's designed for petrol, it will actually clog up the filter, because the filter is not designed to handle diesel, which is a much thicker liquid than petrol is. And so you could just end up with deposits in the filter that just never go anywhere and never disappear. So I thought it would be best just to change it out, just as a bit of due diligence, since I was doing all the other service items. So while I've got them off, I'm just taking a look at the condition of these tyres. They're getting a little bit towards the end of their life now. They've been on the car for about 5 years now. So modern tyres don't last quite as long as old ones do, because the formulations are much more designed for grip, but they don't have quite the longevity of the older tyres. So about 6-7 years is pretty much all you can expect of tyres. And you can actually see that they are starting to crack in the grooves here. Even though they've got tons of tread on them, they are definitely getting a little bit harder. So I think I'm going to have to change these maybe in a year's time or so, but they are good for now. They'll do another summer, I think, and then I'll probably change them next year. Right, so the next thing I'm going to have a look at is this clutch fluid. As you can see, it's gone black, and this is actually quite a common occurrence on these Mark 1 MX5s. And there isn't really any real consensus on why it happens. There are 3 competing theories that I've seen. So the first theory is that because the whole clutch system is very close to the engine and also near the exhaust, that means that the fluid in the system stays very hot all the time, and it's the heat that makes it turn black. And I don't really buy that, because actually brake fluid systems also get very, very hot. In fact, they can get hot enough to boil the brake fluid if you're very unlucky. In fact, that's one of the reasons why brake fluid is hydroscopic, because it absorbs any water in the system to try and neutralize it and stop it from forming pockets where it can boil and cause failures in braking. So the fact that it goes black because of heat doesn't really ring true to me, because otherwise you would see that happening, maybe not on MX5s, but certainly in other cars, you know, particularly performance cars, and that never happens really. It goes a bit darker with age as it collects a bit more moisture, but it never goes completely black. The second theory is that because the clutch system is getting cycled a lot more, that means that the fluid is moving a lot more, and that means that the cap, which has a little hole in it which allows it to adjust for pressure differentials, over time it attracts more water because it's moving a lot more. When you put your foot on the brake, you only really put your foot a small amount, so you don't actually move the fluid a huge amount in the system, and you don't use that as much as you use the clutch. Like every time you change gear, you're using the clutch. Every time you come to a stop, you're using the clutch. Every time you start off, you're using the clutch. Starting and stopping the car, you're using the clutch, etc., etc. So it is true that the system moves a lot more in the clutch system. And basically the theory is that it picks up so much moisture that it just goes completely black, because it draws more air into the system, and the air has moisture in it, and that moisture then gets into the fluid. So I don't really buy that one either, because even very old brake fluid in a car that hasn't been maintained well never goes completely black like that. It will go darker, definitely, but it will never get to the point where it's completely black like you can see there. And that leaves the third theory, which is basically that this reservoir that sits on top of the master cylinder, it's held in place with some rubber grommets. And over time, tiny little particles of rubber in the grommets shave off and end up circling through the fluid. And it's those tiny little particles of rubber that turn it a blacker color. So that's the theory that I think is correct. But what we can do is we can test it. So, I mean, I don't really buy theory one about it getting too hot because, you know, fluid doesn't turn completely black when it gets hot like that. So let's discount that theory. But if theory 2 is correct, we should see a difference in the amount of moisture in the brake fluid and in the clutch fluid. These were changed at the same time, so this fluid is exactly the same age in both containers. So if we see a difference in fluid between the two, then that might lend some more weight to theory number 2, which is that it's picked up more moisture over time. But if they're much the same, then that would indicate that it's theory number 3, which means that it's just little bits of rubber floating around in there. So in order to test our theories, I've gone and bought this brake fluid tester. And you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know that this tester is accurate? And if so, you had the same thoughts as me. So I actually went and did a little experiment, which you can see here. Okay, so welcome to my little science experiment. Here we have 3 pots, and in the leftmost pot we have some spare brake fluid that I had. It hasn't been used, but it has been sitting in a container for a while. In the right-hand side we just have some water that's come straight out of the tap. And in the middle one, we have some brake fluid that I've mixed in with a few drops of water, so that should have a pretty high moisture content. So let's see how they fare. Right, so let's start with the left-hand one. Okay, all right, so it does have a little bit of moisture in it, but it's still acceptable at this point. Right, let's try the water. Yeah, and that has full moisture content because it is water. So finally, let's try the brake fluid that I've mixed in a bit of water. Okay, so initially the last light didn't come on, but actually as I dipped it deeper in, all of the lights then lit up. So it has picked up that there's quite a high moisture content in there, and that brake fluid would not be good for use in a car. So there we go. I think that works fine, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone who wants a cheap brake fluid tester. So I think we can assume that this is relatively accurate, probably not 100% perfect, but certainly good enough for our test purposes. So let's first check the amount of water in the brake fluid. Okay, all right, we're coming up with 2%. Okay. So it's not terrible, but it is getting to the end of its life, and that is about what I would expect for the amount of time that it's been in the car. And I am planning to do a fluid change later this year at some point. Okay, so now let's try the fluid in the clutch system. Now remember, this fluid was changed at the same time as the brake fluid, so we should see that they are in exactly the same condition, unless theory 2 is correct, where it's picked up more moisture, in which case we might see more moisture. So let's see what we get. Oh, interesting. So we're actually getting a higher moisture content in the clutch fluid, as you can see. Let's just do another test again. Ooh, wow. Well, that is quite dramatic. So there is a lot more water in the clutch system. So maybe that means that theory 2 is correct. Perhaps it has just picked up a lot more moisture and therefore has gone darker. Personally, I think it is probably a combination of theory 2 and theory 3, because if you look closely there, you can see there is some kind of black residue around the edge there, and that's not the actual fluid itself. That must be particles of rubber. So I think it is a combination of both. And there you go. That's what science is for. So we now know that that fluid definitely needs changing, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and hopefully that will make things a bit better. So taking a look at this now, I think I can see why we might have more water in this fluid. As you can see, this boot here has completely just disintegrated, and that is pretty poor because this is not that old. I did this maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. So it really should last a bit longer than that. That is just shitty Far East quality for you. So I think that will need changing. I might as well just change this whole slave cylinder because I bought a cheap one, and well, as you can see, it's come back to bite me in the arse, so this is why you don't buy cheap shit. But I'm going to still just change the fluid now anyway, because yeah, I have noticed the clutch is not responding quite as well as it used to. And given the quality of the fluid, that's really not surprising. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove some of this fluid in the reservoir and just put it into a receptacle. There's no point pumping dirty fluid through the system if we can remove it from the top. Ugh. Oh, it's full of black shit. Alright, just to clean up my mess before it causes any damage. So there is a lot of rubbery residue in the bottom there, so I think that is the main cause of the blackness. But yeah, that fluid definitely needed changing anyway. Right, so I've cleaned it out as best I can. There is still some residue in there, but quite honestly, without taking the whole thing out, I can't really do much more than that. But it is better than it was, so I'm going to put some new fluid in it now, and then I've recruited my glamorous assistant Rachel, who is going to help me basically bleed the system and pump the new fluid through.
You need a funnel.
Yeah, I do actually have a funnel, but I don't really want to use it for brake fluid. Right, push down. Okay, lift up, push down again, push down, pull up, push down, pull up, push down, pull up. Oh god, what the f has happened here? Right, so as you can see, it is the dawn of a new day. Yesterday did not go well. I think somehow I managed to get air into the clutch system, and then as much as we pumped, it just wasn't bringing the new fluid through. And it just turned into a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. So we're going to have another crack at it today. Going to just re-bleed everything from scratch again, put whole new fluid through the system, and hopefully we'll come right. So much for a 5-minute job. It's never a 5-minute job. Okay, up, pump it. All right, down. Oh, there's a lot of air there. Okay, pump it now.
Okay, so currently it's like 1 centimetre of resistance, the rest is no resistance.
Okay. Is it improving?
Yeah, I'd say about 50
Okay. All right. Okay, just down. Okay. Pump again. Right. Are you done?
I'm down.
Okay. Okay, pump it. Alright, well, I think it is working now. Clutch seems to be acting normally, and it's all new fluid in the system. So I think now that we've bled it sufficiently, I think it should be alright. I'm going to take the car for a drive and take it for a test anyway. I mean, what's annoying is I'm going to have to change this anyway in the next few months, because that rubber is really perished and not actually doing very much. So air and water is going to get into the system over time because of that. And quite honestly, I think the master cylinder, I'm just going to change at the same time. May as well just put a whole new fresh set of parts on this. I have to say, if it wasn't for this pump, I think I would have really struggled, because stopping air going back into the system when you open the bleed nipple, it's very, very difficult unless you either have a one-way valve, which I did have a kit that has a one-way valve, but for some reason this just doesn't work. So I don't know what's happened to that. But this allowed me to keep negative pressure in the pipe, so that when I did open the valve fluid came out and air didn't go back in, and I think that was what saved this job for me. So yeah, this is very useful. It is a Draper multi-use transfer pump. So might be worth getting yourself one of those. Definitely helped me out in this situation. Right, so car is back down. Just tested the clutch a little bit and it feels all right. So finally, I think we can say job done. That really was much more of a mission than it should have been. But at least the car is basically ready to go back on the roads. But I'll need to sort out that slave cylinder in the pretty near future. So that'll be another job to add to the list. But for now, ready to enjoy this questionable spring weather. There's a little bit of sun at least. So until the next one, cheerio.